The gunshot was so loud it froze the entire gated community in silence. A 12-year-old disabled boy, sitting in his wheelchair, collapsed onto the pavement, blood spreading across the white concrete. Standing just a few feet away was a woman, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, her gun still shaking in her hand. People screamed. Some ran. Others pulled out their phones to record, but she kept repeating the same words. He was trespassing. Trespassing? A disabled child? In his own neighborhood? Sirens were only minutes away. An ambulance was already on its way. But no one there realized the most dangerous person in this story hadn't arrived yet. The boy's father, a man trained to stay calm under fire, a man who had faced death in war zones across the world, a Navy SEAL, and when he showed up, everything changed. This wasn't just a shooting anymore, it was a test of justice. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this video from? Which city, which state? Drop the name of your city in the comments right now. I read every single one. And if this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell here aren't just entertainment. They're real, emotional, and they expose truths most people try to ignore. Now take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about a shooting. It's about power, entitlement, and silence. It's about how a single decision made in anger can destroy lives forever. And it's about a father who came home from war, believing he had already faced the worst humanity could offer, only to discover that the real battle was waiting for him at home. This happened in a quiet American neighborhood. Perfect lawns, white fences, HOA rules taped neatly to mailboxes, the kind of place where people smile during the day and judge quietly behind closed doors at night. A place where authority isn't worn as a badge, it's enforced through rules, threats, and fear. On one ordinary afternoon, a disabled boy went outside in his wheelchair. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't breaking rules. He was just being a child. But within minutes, a single bullet would change everything. A mother's scream, neighbors in shock, phones recording instead of helping, and somewhere on the road, a Navy SEAL racing toward the one call no parent should ever receive. What happens next will expose how fragile justice really is and how fast ordinary people can become monsters. This is where the Rayall story begins. The afternoon started like any other. The sun hung low over the gated community, casting long shadows across perfectly trimmed lawns and freshly washed driveways. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever seemed to go wrong, where people believed danger only existed outside the gates, somewhere far away, in places they saw on the news. 12-year-old Ethan Miller loved afternoons like this. For Ethan, the world was experienced from a wheelchair. A spinal injury from a car accident years earlier had taken his ability to walk, but it had never taken his curiosity. He noticed things others ignored. The sound of sprinklers ticking on and off, the warmth of sunlight on his arms, the way birds gathered on power lines like musical notes waiting to be played. That day, Ethan asked his mother if he could go outside. Just the sidewalk, he said. I won't go far. His mother hesitated, as she always did, not because the neighborhood was unsafe, but because people could be unpredictable. Still, she smiled and nodded. Be back before dinner, she said. Ethan rolled down the driveway, his hands steady on the wheels. He wore a navy blue hoodie and sneakers he loved, even though he couldn't feel them. In his pocket was a small toy car, something he collected, lined up neatly on his bedroom shelf. He liked pretending each one had a story. The sidewalk curved gently past identical houses, each one governed by the same HOA rules. Approved paint colors, approved mailbox designs, approved behavior. Ethan stopped near the corner, just short of the community park. A small sign stood there, half hidden by bushes. Private property, residents only. He had seen it 100 times. He had lived here his entire life. He was a resident. As he adjusted his wheelchair, a voice cut through the quiet. Hey, you can't be there. Ethan looked up. A woman stood across the street, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Her blonde hair was pulled tight, her posture stiff, like someone used to being obeyed. This was Karen Whitmore, head of the HOA committee. Everyone knew her. Everyone avoided her. "I live here," Ethan said softly. She didn't walk closer. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask where his parents were. She just stared. "That area is restricted," she snapped. "Didn't you see the sign?" Ethan felt his face warm. "I wasn't doing anything," he said. "I'm just sitting." Karen sighed, dramatically, like she was dealing with a problem she shouldn't have to explain. "I've warned kids before," she said. "Rules are rules." Ethan shifted in his chair, suddenly aware of how small he felt. "I can move," he said quickly. "I was just resting." Karen turned away, muttering something under her breath. Ethan thought that was the end of it. He turned his wheelchair slightly, preparing to head back home. That's when he heard it, the sound of a phone being dialed. Karen stood by her car now, speaking loudly enough for him to hear. "Yes, this is Karen Whitmore. There's a suspicious individual violating HOA regulations near the park." Suspicious. Ethan's hands tightened on the wheels. "I'm not suspicious," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm just a kid." Karen didn't respond. Minutes passed. Neighbors peeked through blinds. One man stepped onto his porch, watched silently, then went back inside. A woman walking her dog crossed the street to avoid them. No one said a word. Karen ended the call and walked back toward Ethan, her expression cold. "You need to leave," she said. "Now." "I'm trying," Ethan replied, panic creeping in. His arms weren't strong. Turning the chair on the uneven sidewalk took time. Karen's jaw tightened. "I'm tired of people ignoring the rules," she said. "This community has standards." She reached into her purse. Ethan noticed it immediately. "Please," he said. "I'm going." Karen pulled out a handgun. Time slowed. Ethan's mind raced, unable to understand what was happening. This couldn't be real. Adults didn't do this. Neighbors didn't point guns at children. "Ma'am," he whispered, "I didn't do anything wrong." Her finger rested near the trigger. "I warned you," she said. Someone screamed. Another neighbor shouted, "Hey, put that down." But it was too late. The gunshot echoed through the neighborhood like a crack of thunder. Ethan felt a sharp impact, then nothing but heat. His body tipped sideways out of the wheelchair, hitting the pavement hard. The world blurred. Sounds became distant, voices overlapping, footsteps running, someone crying. Blood pooled beneath him. Karen stepped back, her face pale. I didn't mean," she stammered. Sirens wailed in the distance. A woman dropped to her knees beside Ethan, pressing her hands against the wound, begging him to stay awake. "Stay with us, baby," she cried. "Please stay with us." Ethan tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His last clear thought was of his father. Dad will know what to do. Miles away, a phone rang, and when Ethan's father answered, his world shattered in a single sentence. "Your son has been shot," and everything that neighborhood thought it knew about peace, safety, and control was about to be tested. The phone rang twice before Daniel Miller answered. He almost ignored it. Daniel had just finished a workout at the private range on the edge of town. Sweat clung to his shirt, his breathing steady, controlled, muscle memory drilled into him through years of combat. His phone buzzed again in his locker, vibrating louder this time. Something told him not to let it ring again. "Daniel Miller," he said. There was a pause on the other end. Too long. Then a shaky voice spoke. "Sir, this is Officer Reynolds with the County Police Department." Daniel straightened instantly. "Yes. There's been an incident involving your son." The word incident hit him wrong. "What kind of incident?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but hollow. Another pause. "Your son, Ethan, has been shot." The world narrowed to a single sound, the low hum of fluorescent lights above him. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't breathe. "Sir," the officer continued, "he's alive. EMS is with him now. He's being transported to St. Mary's." "Who did it?" Daniel interrupted. The officer hesitated. "A resident. HOA representative." Daniel closed his eyes. "How far out is the ambulance?" "They're en route." Daniel hung up. He moved without thinking. Keys, phone, wallet. His hands were steady, but his chest felt like it was collapsing inward. In war, fear came before action. This was different. This was cold, focused, silent. He drove. Every red light felt like an insult. Every slow driver a threat. His mind replayed Ethan's laugh from the night before, the way his son had lined up toy cars on the table, naming each one after places Daniel had served. Someday, Ethan had said, "I want to see where you went." Daniel gripped the steering wheel harder. Not today. Not like this. Back in the neighborhood, chaos had replaced calm. Police cars lined the street, blue and red lights, bouncing off identical houses like accusations. Yellow tape cut across the sidewalk where Ethan's wheelchair lay on its side, one wheel still spinning slowly. Karen Whitmore sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by officers. Her gun rested on the hood of a patrol car. "I felt threatened," she kept saying. "He wouldn't leave." "He's a child," one officer said, quietly. "He was violating HOA property," Karen snapped. "Rules exist for a reason." A paramedic overheard and shook his head in disbelief. "Ma'am," he said, "that kid was bleeding out." Karen looked away. Neighbors whispered. Some cried. Others filmed from behind curtains. A few shook their heads in shame, but none stepped forward to defend Ethan. Not yet. The HOA sign still stood at the corner, untouched. At the hospital, doctors rushed Ethan into surgery. Machines beeped. Nurses moved quickly. Ethan's mother collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling, whispering prayers she hadn't said in years. When Daniel arrived, he didn't run. He walked. Slow. Controlled. The front desk nurse looked up, startled by the look in his eyes. "I'm Ethan Miller's father," he said. She pointed him down the hall without a word. Daniel found his wife, sitting alone, staring at the floor like it had swallowed her world. When she saw him, she broke. "He was just outside," she sobbed. "Just for a minute." Daniel knelt in front of her and held her hands. "This is not your fault," he said firmly. But inside, something dark was rising. 2 hours later, a surgeon stepped into the waiting room. The bullet missed his heart by less than an inch, the doctor said. "He's stable. Critical but stable." Daniel exhaled for the first time since the call. "Can I see him?" Briefly. Ethan lay pale under white sheets, tubes running from his small body. Daniel stood beside the bed, his jaw clenched tight. He didn't cry. Not yet. He leaned down and whispered, "I'm here, buddy." Ethan's fingers twitched. While Ethan fought for his life, the story hit the news. HOA shooting shocks quiet community. Disabled child shot overrules. Karen Whitmore's name spread fast. So did Daniel Miller's. Someone leaked his military background. Father is former Navy SEAL. The comments exploded. Some demanded justice. Others defended Karen. A few even blamed the parents. Daniel didn't read any of it. He was already on his way back. The police station smelled like coffee and old carpet. Karen sat across from detectives now, her composure returning. "I feared for my safety," she repeated. "I followed protocol." "What protocol involves pulling a gun on a disabled minor?" the detective asked. She said nothing. The door opened. Daniel Miller walked in. Every head turned. He didn't look angry. That scared them more. Karen glanced up and froze. She recognized him immediately. Not his face, but his presence. The way he stood. The way the room seemed smaller around him. "That's him," she whispered. Daniel looked at her. No words. No threats. Just a stare that said this isn't over. Outside, reporters gathered. Inside, a community realized something terrifying. They hadn't just shot a child. They had awakened a father who had survived war. And now, justice was coming one way or another. By morning, the neighborhood no longer looked peaceful. News vans lined the entrance gates. Reporters stood under the HOA sign, microphones raised, speaking into cameras with urgent voices. Helicopters hovered overhead. The same streets where people once waved politely now felt exposed, watched, judged. Inside his car, Daniel Miller sat, silently, parked across from the community entrance. He hadn't slept. His phone buzzed nonstop, calls from old teammates, messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Men who knew him not as a father, but as a weapon. He ignored them all. This wasn't a mission. This was personal. At the hospital, Ethan remained unconscious. Doctors warned the next 48 hours would decide everything. Infection, internal bleeding, brain trauma. Words Daniel had heard before, just never attached to his child. Ethan's mother stayed by the bed, refusing to leave. Daniel kissed his son's forehead once more, then turned away. "I'm going to the neighborhood," he said. "Daniel," she started. "I need to understand," he replied. "Everything." The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. They hadn't invited Daniel. He showed up anyway. The clubhouse buzzed with nervous energy. Board members whispered, papers shaking in their hands. Karen Whitmore's seat sat empty. She was being held for questioning, but her presence filled the room like a ghost. When Daniel entered, the room went quiet. "This is a private meeting," the HOA president said weakly. "So, was my son's life," Daniel replied, "until your rules ended it." No one stopped him. Daniel walked to the center of the room. "I want the truth," he said calmly. "Every camera, every call, every complaint." A board member swallowed hard. "There were previous reports," she admitted. Daniel turned slowly. "Reports about a disabled child?" "Not specifically," another man said quickly, "but Karen filed multiple complaints about unauthorized individuals near the park." "How many?" Daniel asked. Silence. "Answer the question." 17, someone whispered. 17 complaints. All false. All ignored. That evening, Daniel requested the security footage. What he saw made his hands shake. The video showed Ethan sitting still, not moving forward, not approaching Karen, not threatening anyone. It showed Karen pulling her gun. It showed Ethan raising his hands. It showed the shot. Daniel replayed it again, and again, and again. The room felt too small. "This wasn't fear," he said quietly. "This was control." The footage leaked within hours. The internet exploded. Protests formed outside the HOA office. Signs read, "Rules don't justify murder. Disabled lives matter." Karen Whitmore was officially arrested that night. But something didn't sit right with Daniel. She wasn't alone. Through public records, Daniel uncovered emails, HOA group messages, private threads. Karen had power, but she wasn't unchecked. Board members laughed at her messages. Neighbors encouraged her enforcement. Some even thanked her for keeping the neighborhood clean. Clean. Daniel clenched his jaw. This wasn't one person. It was a culture. A local journalist reached out. Off the record, she said, "Karen's lawyer is pushing self-defense." Daniel laughed, not out loud, internally. Self-defense against a wheelchair. That night, Daniel sat alone in his garage. Old memories surfaced. War zones. Split-second decisions. Rules of engagement drilled into his bones. He had been trained to assess threats. Ethan had been no threat. Daniel opened a small metal box and pulled out his service insignia. He hadn't touched it in years. Tomorrow, he would speak publicly. Not as a SEAL, as a father. The press conference drew national attention. Daniel stood at the podium, cameras flashing. "My son is fighting for his life," he said steadily. "He was shot for existing." He paused. This wasn't an accident. It was entitlement armed with authority. The crowd fell silent. "If you believe this could happen anywhere," he continued, "you're right, because it already has." Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. HOA sponsors pulled out. Board members resigned. Karen's defense began to crack. But the final blow hadn't landed yet. Late that night, Daniel received an anonymous email. Subject line, "You need to see this." Attached was a video, unreleased, time-stamped weeks earlier. Karen bragging, laughing. "I'll make them follow the rules one way or another," she said. "They always do." Daniel closed his eyes. The truth was no longer buried. And in the next chapter, the entire country would be forced to confront it, because this story was no longer about one boy. It was about who society protects. and who its sacrifices. The trial began 6 weeks later. By then, the story had already burned its way into the national conscience. What started as a local HOA incident had transformed into something far bigger, something raw and uncomfortable. News anchors argued over it nightly. Social media split into warring sides. Everyone had an opinion, and at the center of it all sat Karen Whitmore, wearing a gray suit, her hair neatly styled, hands folded like she was attending a board meeting instead of standing trial for shooting a child. Across the courtroom sat Daniel Miller. He wore a simple black suit. No medals, no insignia, nothing that hinted at who he used to be. But his posture, straight, still, unyielding, spoke louder than words. He wasn't there to intimidate. He was there to witness the truth. Ethan was not. Doctors said the stress could cause complications. He remained in recovery, learning how to breathe deeply again, how to trust a world that had nearly taken his life. The empty chair beside Daniel felt heavier than any presence. The prosecution opened with facts. Security footage, 911 call transcripts, medical reports. They showed the jury the video more than once. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of a woman's voice on the recording. "I warned you." Then the gunshot. One juror covered her mouth. Another stared at the floor. Karen showed no reaction. Then came the defense. Her lawyer stood confidently, pacing. "My client feared for her life," he said. "She was alone. She followed community protocol. She perceived a threat." Daniel's jaw tightened. The word threat echoed through the room like an insult. The lawyer continued, "Fear does not discriminate. Fear doesn't analyze wheelchairs or age. Fear reacts." The audacity of it made people gasp. Outside the courthouse, protesters screamed in response when the argument was broadcast live. Then came the witnesses, neighbors. Some lied. Others told half-truths. "I thought she was calling the police," one woman said. "I didn't see the gun at first," said another. But then the paramedic testified. "He was compliant," she said. "He was trying to leave." The officer followed. "There was no immediate danger," he stated. "None." Karen's lawyer objected. Overruled. The turning point came on day 4. The prosecutor stood and said, "The state calls Daniel Miller." The room shifted. Karen's head snapped up. Daniel walked to the stand calmly, placing his hand on the Bible. "Do you swear?" "I do," he said. He sat. "How old is your son?" the prosecutor asked. 12. "What condition does he live with?" "He's paralyzed from the waist down." Daniel's voice never wavered. "Mr. Miller," she continued, "based on your training and experience, did you see any threat in the video?" Karen's lawyer jumped up. "Objection." Overruled, the judge said, "Answer the question." Daniel looked at the jury. "I've assessed threats in combat zones," he said. "People carrying explosives, armed fighters, ambushes." He paused. "A child sitting still is not a threat." Silence filled the room. Cross-examination was aggressive. The defense tried to provoke him. "You're trained to use violence, aren't you?" "I'm trained to prevent unnecessary violence," Daniel replied. "You've killed people." Karen flinched. "Yes," Daniel said, "to protect others. And yet you expect this jury to believe you wouldn't react out of fear?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Fear doesn't excuse pulling a trigger," he said. "Discipline prevents it." The jury listened. Every word landed. Then came the email, the unreleased video. The prosecutor played it for the court. Karen's voice filled the speakers. "I'll make them follow the rules one way or another." Laughter, bragging, control. Karen's lawyer stood frozen. The judge stared hard at the screen. Karen's face drained of color. This wasn't fear. This was intent. Outside, the nation reacted in real time. Sponsors dropped. HOAs across the country scrambled to rewrite policies. Former neighbors came forward with stories, threats, intimidation, abuse. Karen Whitmore was no longer a single defendant. She was a symbol. Closing arguments were brief. The prosecution spoke of accountability. The defense spoke of misunderstanding. Then the jury left. Hours passed. Daniel sat still, hands clasped, eyes forward. He didn't pray. He waited. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. On the charge of attempted murder, the foreman said, "We find the defendant guilty." Karen let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Daniel closed his eyes. But it wasn't over. Because justice in court doesn't heal wounds. It only names them. And outside that courthouse, a broken boy was still learning how to feel safe again. The verdict answered one question. But the hardest part, what comes after survival, was still waiting. The verdict made headlines for weeks. HOA leader found guilty. Justice for disabled boy. Navy SEAL father speaks out. People celebrated. Commentators called it a victory. Social media declared justice served. But inside a quiet hospital room on the 3rd floor of St. Mary's Medical Center, justice felt incomplete. Ethan survived. That was the miracle everyone clung to. But survival came with a price no headline could explain. The first time Ethan woke fully, he didn't speak. He stared at the ceiling, eyes wide, breathing shallow. Every beep of a machine made his body tense. When a nurse entered, his heart rate spiked. When a door slammed somewhere down the hall, he flinched so hard his hands shook. Daniel watched it all. War had taught him many things, but not how to protect a child from fear living inside his own body. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said softly, sitting beside the bed. "You're safe." Ethan didn't answer. He just whispered, barely audible, "She said I didn't belong." Those words hit harder than any bullet. Physical recovery was slow. The bullet had caused internal damage. Complications layered on top of an already fragile spine. Doctors worked carefully, afraid to undo years of progress Ethan had fought for. But the emotional wounds were worse. Ethan refused to go near windows, refused to go outside, refused to be alone. At night, he woke screaming. Sometimes he cried for his father. Sometimes he begged Karen to stop, even though she was gone. Therapists came and went. Some spoke gently. Others spoke clinically. Ethan listened, nodded, then withdrew. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult session, he finally looked at Daniel and asked the question his father had been dreading. "Dad, why did she hate me?" Daniel's throat tightened. "She didn't hate you," he said carefully. "She was wrong." "But she looked at me like I was bad," Ethan whispered, "like I wasn't supposed to be there." Daniel turned away for a moment, because the truth was harder. "She thought rules mattered more than people," he finally said, "and that's not your fault." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing a lesson no child should have to learn. Outside the hospital, life moved on. The neighborhood changed its name. The HOA disbanded. Karen Whitmore was sentenced to decades behind bars. But trauma doesn't leave when the cameras do. Daniel noticed it in small things. Ethan stopped collecting toy cars, stopped asking questions, stopped dreaming out loud. The boy who once imagined traveling the world now measured safety in feet and doors. Daniel blamed himself. He replayed every decision, every deployment, every missed birthday. Every time he thought the world back home was safe. He had protected strangers overseas, but couldn't protect his own son on a sidewalk. One night, Daniel sat alone in the garage again. This time, he didn't open a metal box. He opened a notebook, and he wrote. Months later, Daniel stood before a room filled with lawmakers. Ethan wasn't with him. Crowds still made him panic. Daniel spoke anyway. "My son was shot because authority went unchecked," he said, "because silence felt safer than speaking up." He showed them photos. Ethan smiling before. Ethan recovering after. "This isn't about guns alone," Daniel continued. "It's about who we see as human." The room listened. Some shifted uncomfortably. Good. Change came slowly. HOA regulations were reviewed nationwide. Mandatory de-escalation training was introduced. Civilian firearm restrictions in community roles were debated openly. None of it erased the past, but it acknowledged it. The first time Ethan went outside again was nearly a year later. Not to the old neighborhood. Never there. It was a park by the water, wide and open. No fences. No signs. Daniel walked beside him, hands ready but not hovering. "You don't have to," Daniel said. "I know," Ethan replied. They sat together in silence, watching birds skim across the lake. After a while, Ethan spoke. "Dad, yeah. If I go somewhere, will you come with me?" Daniel swallowed. "Always." Ethan nodded, then did something that made Daniel's chest ache. He smiled. Not the same smile, but a real one. Survival didn't mean the pain disappeared. It meant learning to carry it. It meant choosing to live anyway. And for Daniel Miller, that was the hardest mission he had ever faced, because this time there were no rules of engagement. Only love, and the hope that one day his son would believe the world could be safe again. 2 years passed. Time moved forward the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission. The headlines faded. The hashtags disappeared. New outrage replaced old outrage. For most people, the story became something they remembered. For the Miller family, it became something they lived with. Ethan was 14 now, taller, thinner, stronger in ways no chart could measure. But something's never fully healed. He still startled at loud noises, still scanned rooms before relaxing, still asked where the exits were. Yet there was something new too. Resolve. The invitation arrived in a plain white envelope. United States Senate Committee on Civil Rights and Community Safety. Daniel read it twice before handing it to Ethan. "They want us to speak," Daniel said. "Both of us." Ethan stared at the paper for a long moment. "You don't have to," Daniel added quickly. "Not if it's too much." Ethan thought about the sidewalk, the sign, the gun. Then he looked up. "I want to," he said. The hearing room was massive. High ceilings, flags, cameras everywhere. Ethan rolled beside his father, his hands steady on the wheels. Daniel noticed that, not because it was new, but because it meant something. When Ethan was sworn in, his voice was soft but clear. "My name is Ethan Miller," he said. "I was shot for breaking a rule I didn't know existed." The room went still. "I used to think rules were there to protect people," Ethan continued. "But sometimes rules protect power." Lawmakers leaned forward. "I survived," he said. "But some people don't. And they don't get a second chance to tell you what fear feels like." He paused. "I'm telling you now." There were no tears, just truth. Outside, reporters rushed forward. "Ethan, do you forgive her?" someone shouted. Ethan stopped his wheelchair and turned. "I don't think forgiveness is the point," he said calmly. "I think responsibility is." Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. That moment went viral. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Karen Whitmore watched the hearing from a prison common room. The sound was muted, but she didn't need it. She recognized the boy, the man, the consequences. For the first time since the shooting, there was no argument left to hide behind. No rule book, no authority, just a mirror. Change followed, slow, imperfect, real. Federal guidelines were issued limiting armed authority in civilian associations. HOA boards across the country were restructured. Training became mandatory. Oversight became law. But Daniel knew something important. Policy didn't save Ethan. People did. The woman who applied pressure to the wound. The paramedic who spoke the truth. The jurors who listened. The strangers who refused to let the story die. Justice, Daniel learned, was not a moment. It was a process. One evening, Daniel and Ethan stood at a different sidewalk. Not the old one. This one had no gates, no signs, just a quiet street and an ice cream shop at the corner. "You nervous?" Daniel asked. Ethan nodded. "Me too," Daniel admitted. Ethan smiled slightly. They rolled forward together. Inside the shop, the cashier knelt down to eye level. "What can I get you?" she asked. Ethan scanned the menu. "Chocolate," he said, "with sprinkles." Daniel watched as his son laughed at something small, something ordinary, and he realized something powerful. The goal was never revenge. It was reclamation. That night, Ethan wrote something for school. A single sentence. "Safety isn't about control. It's about care." Daniel read it and felt his chest tighten, not with anger, with hope. Years from now, people would forget names. They would forget dates. But somewhere, a parent would pause before assuming. A neighbor would speak up instead of looking away. An authority figure would think twice, and a child would be safer because of it. That was the legacy. Not fear, not violence, but awareness. Daniel tucked Ethan into bed that night, something he hadn't done in years. "Dad?" Ethan asked. "Yeah. Do you think it was worth telling our story?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, "because silence helps the wrong people." Ethan nodded and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he slept without waking. Justice didn't give them back what was lost, but it gave them something just as important: a voice. And now that voice belonged to anyone willing to listen and to act. Because stories like this don't end when the trial does. They end when we decide what kind of society we want to be. If this story shook you, it was supposed to. Because Ethan's story isn't just about one boy, one HOA, or one neighborhood. It's about what happens when people stay silent. It's about what happens when power goes unchecked and humanity comes second. So now I want to ask you something. Backhand index pointing right, would you have spoken up? Backhand index pointing right, would you have stepped in? Backhand index pointing right, or would you have looked away, hoping someone else would handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let people know where you stand. And don't forget, comment your city and state below so we know how far this message is reaching. This isn't just a video. It's a conversation that needs to happen everywhere. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe awareness can save lives, then subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the algorithm only pushes what people choose to support. And if even one person speaks up tomorrow because of this story, then Ethan's pain wasn't ignored. Stay aware, stay human, and never stay silent.